So verse 14, but I have a few things against you, because you have there those who hold the doctrine of Balaam and who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality. So the key thing to note here really is the doctrine of Balaam. So as it says here, he taught Balak to corrupt Israel. It's quite interesting because there are two other references to this doctrine of Balaam, and we see it in 2 Peter 2:15 and Jude 11. And when it's used, it typically means to fall to corruption, often due to covetousness, but again the idea of falling to corruption or being deceived in falling to corruption or something along those lines. So this is something we see in the Old Testament. So we see the doctrine of Balaam between Numbers 22 and Numbers 25. Very, very briefly, Balaam was a prophet hired by King Balak of Moab to curse Israel. God would not allow him to curse them directly. Balaam actually adhered to that. So instead of getting around that, Balaam basically advised a different strategy for Balak. He convinced them to corrupt Israel from within, to seduce them spiritually and morally, mix them with pagan worship. So the big story goes that obviously he said, well, if you want to get to Israel, try and get some of your Moabite women to seduce the children of Israel to commit sexual immorality. And then they do that, and obviously they then faced obviously God's punishment from that. So again, this sort of relates to what happened during the period of Pergamos, as the church adopted many practices Christians still do today. Now, this is going to be the point, likely, where I start to offend some people. I did say that in the first talk that I would, so this is it really. It's going to be the first one that does, probably. So I really want to explore some of the doctrine of Balaam. So obviously between 312 and 590, the church adopted many pagan practices that we still see today. I mentioned a lot of them earlier. So veneration of maybe some images and relics, veneration of Mary and saints. Something you see actually is a cross symbol. So actually this wasn't really used by Christians until about the 4th century. During this time, it wasn't like an emblem or something that represented Christianity. It was introduced during this time and actually predates Christianity. You'll see cross symbols used in ancient Egypt, etc. The use of incense and ceremonialism. So again, these are things that, particularly when you look in maybe Catholicism or even Eastern Orthodox, the use of incense. This comes directly from sort of Eastern paganism. We see the elevation of priests and a more rigid clerical structure, or clerical order. Again, the idea actually of a priest that we see today in the modern church that is directly carried over from paganism. Obviously, we know in the Bible we're all priests in a sense, or the only true priest is Jesus. But obviously, a Sunday, Sabbath, and laws. Sunday was never used as the day of Sabbath, typically until this point. Many argued that maybe they met on the first day, but it was cemented during this time as a time where legally people would have one day of rest, which would be Sunday. Before then it was Saturday, of course. And then we've got the two that are probably going to offend people the most, which is Easter and then Christmas as well. I want to focus a bit on Christmas today. I did a bit in the talk in November. I did a lot about Christmas, but I'm going to focus on Christmas today because I imagine about maybe over half the people here probably do Christmas. I know obviously me and my family don't, so I know it's not going to be 99%. But yeah, I think it's worth having a look, at least to offer a different alternative or different viewpoint. and get you to think about whether you should or not. So, we're going to look at Christmas, the pagan origin. I think it gives a really good example of the doctrine of Balaam in use, as it obviously became something that was adopted by Christians for thousands of years, and even people we might reject a lot of the Roman Catholicism, Catholic paganism, but there are still elements that many Christians still do today. And we're obviously going to see how obviously Christmas originates, particularly from sun worship. Again, I've talked about this in previous talks, and I'm going to directly reference the argument made by Alexander Hislop in his work, The Two Babylons. So, a bit of the context of this. So, the original Christmas is understood to have been a festival to celebrate the rebirth of Nimrod as Tammuz. So, biblically, Nimrod founded Babylon in Genesis 10, and he was proclaimed as a god in Babylonian mythology. And he formed part of the Babylonian Trinity, which included Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. The story of where Tammuz came from is such. So Nimrod died, and Semiramis claimed Nimrod was resurrected as the sun god. She then claims that he, as the sun god, inseminated her. She gave birth to Tammuz on the 25th of December. Tammuz was therefore the reincarnated version of Nimrod, and he was divine. Semiramis claims that when he was born, she saw an evergreen tree grow from a dead stump, which symbolized Nimrod's new life. And to celebrate this, the gifts would be left under a tree around the winter solstice, but leading up to the 25th of December, where we saw this event. So it's typically where you find Christmas trees, gifts being given, this sort of thing. And this started the Babylonian religion of worshipping Tammuz. We actually see Tammuz referenced in the Bible. So we see there Ezekiel 8:14. The women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz. Now Semiramis was also worshipped during this time, and this started a popular concept of mother and child worship. So we see an image there. Again, this sort of looks like what you might see with Mary and Jesus. And this became a very key concept in many of the pagan religions. We see the examples. We see Asia, Egypt, Greece, India, Japan, Persia. And these all culminated with Rome, firstly with Venus and Cupid, but then with Mary and Jesus, how they've taken Mary to be the mother of God and Jesus, obviously to be the Son of God, but they've taken something which is true and they've twisted it in this way, and you see that in obviously the Catholic religion. So when the Roman Empire conquered many of these civilizations, they took on board many of these customs that they encountered, and this is the case for the sun worship, or the worship of the sun god. In 274, Aurelian had promoted Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, which means birthday of the unconquerable sun, in honor of Sol Invictus. So this was celebrated on the 25th of December, which is in line with the winter solstice. And it's at this time of the year, this is obviously why it's for the honor of the sun gods, is where the daylight started to increase. So it was seen as like a rebirth of the sun around this time of year. And in his book, Hislop argues this is taken directly from Tammuz, as Tammuz was the rebirth of Nimrod in the same way Sol Invictus is born. So obviously Rome has just taken what was from Babylon, they've adopted it to Roman religion, and obviously then that has transferred into Christianity when the Roman Empire became Christian. Which is what I've just said. So this was used by Constantine during the 4th century. So Constantine being converted in 312 AD, becoming sole emperor of the Roman Empire, I think in around 321 AD. And obviously this is the earliest known reference to the 25th of December as Christ's birth. We see this in around 336 AD. Before then, Christians tended to focus on Christ's death and resurrection rather than his birth. And many Christians make the argument that pagans adopted the 25th of December from Christian tradition. So I just want to share the counter view. Many early Christians, so they believed that Jesus was conceived on the 25th of March, as in their view, Jesus must have died on the 25th of March. So he must have died on the same day he was born, and therefore that is 9 months on is then the 25th of December. So, the day he was born, the day he was conceived. So then he must have therefore been born on the 25th of December. So that's the way the logic follows. This was supposedly used before 274 AD. So they therefore conclude that the pagan Roman Empire must have taken the date and taken it from Christianity. The problem with this is that there's very little evidence that the early church used the 25th of December as the birth of Christ, or that it was annually celebrated. There's no evidence from the apostolic age at all. Before the year 336, there was very little evidence. And I think even if this was true, the 25th of December had already held significance in the pagan Roman world. So it's much more likely that the early Christians took the 25th of December from paganism rather than the other way around. So it's more likely that if that was the case, that they had celebrated Christ's birth on the 25th of December, it was taken from something that developed 500 years before, even 1,000 years before in pagan mythology. So obviously we see how the 25th of December as the date for the birth of the sun god has been used by many pagan societies. As Rome conquered these societies, it took on these practices. So a lot of the practices that were done by Babylon or any other, particularly in the East, Roman soldiers would often convert to those religions. They'd come back to Rome, they'd come back to neighbouring towns and cities, and they'd start to influence the religion going on back at home. And all these pagan practices, they come together and amalgamated into the Dies Natalis Sols Invicti. So the birthday of Sol Invictus, all those previous pagan traditions come into that one. So when obviously the 4th century rolls around and the Roman Empire converts to Christianity, they simply take that Roman festival there before and just make it Christian. And Constantine, therefore, has a very easy way of getting a lot of the Roman populace to convert to Christianity. It makes it very easy to cement his power. And the reason I went into Christmas, and the reason I mention all of this, is that this is a really, really good example, because I still think it's something that gets believers today. This is a really good example of a stumbling block that is put even before believers who I believe are part of that remnant group of true believers. So, going back to Revelation 2:14, so obviously the actions that they were allowed to do, or they made or seduced into doing, were obviously to eat things sacrificed to idols and to commit sexual immorality. So this is what Israel were seduced into back in Numbers. But spiritually, this is the same thing, I believe, that Christians, when during this time period, they started to engage in idolatry and other such things. I think Christmas is an example of this, in my view. You may think that, obviously, a lot of the things like shrines or idols being used in church are examples. Along with that, I think that a lot of the festivals we do, Easter, Christmas, etc., I think these are also other examples of this.